Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome into another podcast by George. Really appreciate people watching, particularly during these very tenuous times as the country tries to figure out what to do with that man-child schlep orange nut Donald Trump. I mean, we're finally going to be rid of him. They're trying to get him on impeachment. They're trying to get him on, what would it be, the Amendment 25. He's too crazy to be president. Get him out of there. And there's also an Amendment 14, Article 3 in the House that they're trying to use to get him out of there. And particularly based on what happened at the Capitol, originally I was thinking, just lead him down the ramp here in a week or two and get him out of there and get it over with, and then pursue him legally in the Southern District of New York. He's probably going to pardon himself on all federal crimes, but go ahead and convict him on those things and prevent him from rising again, basically, that way. But then upon further review, I'm looking at it, and these QAnon nuts are running around, and they're not going to be satisfied unless Trump remains in office. And that ain't going to happen. Joe Biden's going to be the next president of the United States. He's going to take over. Those people are never going to be satisfied, so you might as well go ahead and pursue him, get it done, get it over with. And as you've heard me say on the podcast before, there were any number of things that they could have convicted Donald Trump on, or should have, as far as impeachment is concerned. First and foremost, probably, was his crimes against world humanity, really, when it comes to the climate. The emollients clause, I mean, that was a slam dunk. That was easy, enriching himself at the expense of government and all Americans. His COVID response was eminently impeachable. And, of course, those hellacious sanctions that he's imposing on innocent civilians around the world, that would have been an impeachable offense. And I always thought black bagging those people up in Portland, throwing them in the back of vans with unmarked government vehicles, to me, that was an impeachable offense. But, of course, Congress didn't want to do that. They wanted to get him on something that only he was responsible for. They wanted to avoid any complicity with their own members. And so they tried to get him on Russiagate and Ukrainegate, and all of that failed. Well, it looks like they got their man now, folks. Looks like he's finally stepped in something that doesn't involve them, that they're going to be able to get him in impeached and, go for it. Because like I said, they're not going to be satisfied unless he remains in office, and he ain't going to remain in office. So I've kind of changed my opinion on that a little bit. I guess go ahead and pursue him, then get him legally afterwards as well. I mean, don't give up on that. I see where his banks are withdrawing their support. They're pulling their loans. That's going to sink him. The corporate America that was supporting him because he gave them tax cuts and preferred consideration, they're backing away from him. So things ain't looking good for Donald Trump. Okay, that's the backdrop, kind of the segue for today's podcast. I wanted to get into this because, I'm talking about Joe Biden, obviously, what's coming in the way of his administration. You heard Matthew Ho on the podcast recently talking about his horrific potential appointees, particularly in the departments of state and defense, the warlords, the people slogging their blob asses out of the military-industrial complex to become part and parcel of America again. And it's really bad. I mean, I don't know what to tell people. Joe Biden believes that we're going to extricate ourselves from everything that's afflicting us today, including this horror that you're seeing in Washington, D.C., by a return to yesterday. And I just can't fathom that. The hegemon, the terror that is being visited upon the United States is part and parcel because of what happened yesterday. And these cabinet appointees are reflecting that. Well, one major department that we're qualified to talk about here in the heartland is the USDA. Tom Vilsack is being considered for that appointment. And the way that I put it to people about Vilsack, a lot of the partisans, particularly the Democrats, are jumping up and down because he was beloved here in the state of Iowa by the Democratic partisans. And, of course, just people that are identifying with the state or thrilled that Vilsack is getting to office, Republicans and Democrats, because what he can do to help Iowa, and particularly the big corporate Iowa farmers. But I'm telling folks, be careful what you wish for. Now, let me put it to you this way. I want to just give you some names here. Nishnabotna, Keokuk, Meskwaki, Iowa. What are those names? Those are Native American names, folks. Those are people that used to live here, that used to walk this land. And when they did in the heartland, where did they get their water? They drank it out of streams and rivers. They drank surface water. Folks, I want to tell you something. If you drink surface water today in the state of Iowa, as an example, you're probably going to die. That's how bad it is. Not only that, we can't drink groundwater. Water that's 20, 30, 100 feet in the ground, we can't drink it. Why? Let's get ready for some straight talk, straight from the heartland, folks. That's what I always say on podcasts by George. We can't drink groundwater in this state because of pig shit. Yeah, pig shit. And now the surface water that we can't drink, we're all responsible for that. We got a hand in that. But the groundwater that we can't drink, who's got a big hand in that? Who's got a huge responsibility for that? Tom Vilsack. And that brings us to our guest today on Podcast by George. She's Sylvia Secchi, and an associate professor in the Department of Geographical and Sustainability Sciences and senior research fellow, Public Policy Center at the University of Iowa. So, Sylvia, welcome on in to a Podcast by George.
Thank you, George. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you on, and it's mostly because of this excellent op-ed piece that I saw. I read that and I thought, my God, she's on it. I mean, she's all over it. She's picking up what I'm putting down here. The headline says, Tom Vilsack for USDA. Expect more inaction on hunger, discrimination, pollution, and rural decline. And the subtitle says the Biden-Harris transition team is touting its Build Back America approach, and they appear serious about climate change, although I could find some people that would debate that. But okay, the Vilsack nomination, however, screams build back more of the same. And I talked about Joe Biden during the political primaries, the run-up to the election, a lot. He is the status quo candidate. He believes we're all going to be best served by returning to yesteryear. I've told people, my God, that's not what we need now. And when it comes to this USDA appointment in agriculture, it couldn't be more apparent. So I kind of wanted to just pick up this second paragraph here, Sylvia, to get you going, because I know this is important to you. You put it high in the article, and it reads, though 76% of the Farm Bill budget goes to nutrition, which relates to the demand and consumption of food, department secretaries, historically, predecessors, focus on supply issues, namely livestock and crops, many of which aren't even food. Now, like I said, I know you believe that's important because it's up high in this article. Explain that a little more, if you would, please.
So I think one of the things that your listeners are probably well aware of is that the historical the historical processes, right, that drive the Farm Bill are a compromise between urban areas and coastal areas, where senators and Congress people are really concerned about food stamps, for example, right? And the consumption of food, the WIC programs, the school lunches, versus the heartland where people are really concerned about the supply, right? So the commodity title of the Farm Bill, how much money goes into CRP, that kind of stuff. And there is an imbalance in the power that we have given to the heartland. And I live in Iowa City, and I went to school in Ames, by the way. So, I really see this here. An imbalance in the decision-making power that we have given to the producers of these commodities to the detriment of the consumers of these commodities and the drinkers of the water. And all the people who live here, and they're not necessarily directly or indirectly affected by agriculture. And so I think that there is a need to think more broadly about food security, There's a need to think more broadly about, the fact that this production processes that are the focus of historically of the secretary and the operation of USDA rely on taxpayer money. As I say later on in the piece, almost 40% of the net income of farmers in 2019 was from subsidies. I think we need to do a better job at using that money wisely.
Well, and I wanted to get to that also because Vilsack in particular, he's coming out of the Dairy Council or the Dairy Export Council. I mean, he kind of dove into the swamp after he left the political scene. And correct me if I'm wrong, this is just kind of a statistic I've had in the back of my head, but I think I heard once that dairy farmers, 70% of their income comes from subsidies. And moreover, millions of gallons of milk and pounds of cheese each year are destroyed because there's no market for them. Are those figures anywhere near correct in your mind?
I don't want to say yes or no because I can't, like, off the top of my head remember those numbers. What I can tell you though is that we, especially in the dairy sector, we are seeing unprecedented turmoil. And one of the ways in which I think about this is that we are thinking of agriculture in the US as proceeding through a linear path, right? But what is happening is we have reached a threshold where we have very few farmers now, and they're very, very big.
Yes.
And they're pretty happy with the system and the way it works. But the smaller farmers who are not doing quite as well, right? They are the ones who are suffering a lot of the consequences of these industrialization of agriculture. And it was okay to industrialize in the 40s, right? What the New Deal did for agriculture was a lot, right? With the first Farm Bill and the first programs, the land grant universities, all the research to increase yields, all these chemical and biological revolutions, better hybrids, synthetic fertilizer. That system seemed to work, chug along pretty well in the 60s. And then we start seeing in the 70s, we have a lot of production, fence row to fence row. Our environment starts suffering. In the 80s, we have the farm crisis, but we've kept doing more of the same. We have kept this subsidy system that encourages more production. We have kept not thinking about antitrust, and that has resulted particularly in the livestock sector, but also on the input side in the seed and chemical sector in oligopolies. And so what I think we need to take a step back and say, is more of this kind of approach going to help, or have we reached a threshold in which these payment systems, these subsidy systems, this lack of enforcement of antitrust, what they do is they keep promoting consolidation. Is that good for rural Iowa?
I'm glad you mentioned antitrust and the fact that we need to review this, because not only do you have this consolidation of farming in the hands of just a few corporations now, but you've got this consolidation of wealth. I talked about that on just a podcast or two. Maybe the biggest change in my world here, looking around in central Iowa since the time when I was a kid, when farming was a hard life. It was small farmers, and they were poor folks by and large. My God, the money now that these folks are making, and they're doing it in a form of socialism, basically, from our government in the form of subsidies and support. That money is coming from their farming the government to a large extent. Now, I wanted to read this other paragraph from your article, which I thought was outstanding. It says, historical, racial, and discrimination in the United States agriculture area has been directed against Black and Native American farmers, enabled and perpetuated by USDA policies, another source of tension. This has resulted in white farmers owning 98% and operating 94% of U.S. farmland. And to go back to what I was talking about at the beginning a little bit with Native Americans, when they were here, they could drink surface water. My God, we're so far from that, it's unbelievable. But the insult to the injury here is that land that now is in the control of these white oligarchs, so to speak, the insult is it was taken by and large, and those people now are shut out from even participating. I thought that was just an egregious commentary that you were making there in that paragraph particularly.
So I'm glad you bring that up, because a lot of places now do land acknowledgements before. Lots of universities do that. I don't do a land acknowledgement in my class. I actually teach a whole class about the Native American history of Iowa, because Iowa is a very interesting place. Being west of the Mississippi, the federal government promised Native Americans that there would be no white settlers west of the Mississippi. Well, that did not happen, right? I'm an immigrant from Italy, so I'm clearly a white settler right here. Mm-hmm. The federal government moved along, right? The Bakoja, or Iowa, as we call them, were here, and then the federal government started moving people, Native American people, west, and so that's how then the Meskwaki and the Sauk ended up here, and then the Iowa are actually in Oklahoma or in Kansas, in the reservations there. But the point here is, think about the amazingly rapid transformation of the landscape we have seen in Iowa. In 1880, most of Iowa was still a prairie. In 1920, most of the Des Moines Lobe, which is some of the most productive land on the planet, was all tiled, so could be used for agriculture, because that's a prairie pothole. It was literally a swamp, right?
Yes, a bog.
And so think about how fast the white people changed the system here to really focus on production. And it's been production ever since. And it's this kind of like mindless idea that we produce more and it's better. That is a big issue, because, actually I have a PhD in economics from Iowa State, and they taught me that if you produce a lot, crop prices go down. That's not a good thing, right? And so we have this tension that we want to produce more, then the prices collapse, and so we have to subsidize. And until we kind of like come to grips with the fact that producing more is not the solution to our rural development problems, we are going to keep going downhill, right? Past the threshold of what is working in the system. And it's so that's why I'm like, let's put the brakes to this process. Let's think about whether more of the same is really the way to go forward from now on. And there's all sorts of issues, as you bring up. There's the environment and the drinking water. There is the kind of like some respect for the environment overall, and the kind of like use of the environment for all the people who live in Iowa, not just the farmers, right? And there is the issue of who gets to benefit from this. Those white land-rich farmers get to benefit. If you are a beginning farmer and you don't come from a farming background,
good luck.
I wish you best of luck.
Yes, that's right. Well, also, I've got to say that, in addition to the corporate farming that we talked about, the factory farms, and in your article, you talked about the consolidation and the problems with the meatpacking industry. And again, that happened, a lot of that happened on the Vilsack watch.
Yes, there was, USDA was not, let me just be kind, and USDA was not very proactive in enforcement of the Sherman Act. And what we are seeing is that this has resulted essentially in a livestock sector, particularly in places like Iowa, right, where we're talking about pigs and layers, where the farmers don't have any autonomy. They're not really farmers; they're contractors. They're like hired laborers who just own that land where the confinements are on, but have really little autonomy in what they can do. And the margins are very thin, and again, this is not a rural development strategy that is viable. For when I hear people saying, "Oh, we can take another 20 million pigs," I cringe. Where are we going to put them? What water are those pigs going to drink?
It's unbelievable the amount of water that goes in. Billions, hundreds of, it's phenomenal. Like, maybe I'll put the statistic up on the screen here when I edit the podcast, because I can't recall the exact number. Well, we got to move along. I'm running out of time here. I wanted to shine a light on this. You're helping a lot. I really appreciate that. A couple of things I wanted to say here that are very timely in the news. Just today, when I'm recording this, there was news that Donald Trump, because of the riot in Washington, D.C., that insurrection, that attempted coup, I don't know what you want to call it exactly, but he's having his social media accounts suspended. And I said, I am against censorship in almost all circumstances. Except maybe this, you could make an argument, should, because he's dog whistling and the dogs are attacking and he's doing it on social media. Maybe censorship is warranted here. Well, I want to give people another example of censorship and why you want to be very careful about that. It's illegal to film factory farming. You can't show the inside of these factory farms or these meatpacking facilities and put it on television as an example. And also, another thing, just a couple of years ago, now I haven't heard the outcome of this, and you can chime in if you've heard anything more, but I heard here's an example of what's going on politically. In the Iowa House of Representatives, they passed a law, overwhelmingly passed in the House, that if you carry what they called specialty eggs, the pasture-fed, cage-free eggs in your store, you have to carry non-humanely raised eggs. I don't know how you want to call that, but my God, are we still doing that type of thing politically in this day and age? Yes, we are. So, folks, it's all intertwined. Politics, censorship, agriculture, and beware people like Tom Vilsack and the build more of the same philosophy of the Joe Biden administration. I mean, we're all going to die, maybe a slower death, but it's still a death if we don't make some major changes. And that's what Professor Secchi was here to talk to us about today. Sylvia, I want to give you a last word here to close up. Anything you want to say in closing to kind of put a bow on this edition of the PBG?
Well, because I don't think I put myself in enough trouble with that letter, I want to say that besides what is happening at the federal level, there are things that we can do in Iowa. One is think about what the master matrix means for local control, right? And control, county level control, community level control of CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations. Is the master matrix really working? I doubt that's the case, right? So the laws that we have on how we spend the money, the proposed laws or not proposed. I hear the governor is not going to take it to the legislature this year, but there are things we can do in Iowa to improve our environment. So this is going to take a local, state, and federal effort to really change the landscape in ways where it works for everyone, not just for the lucky few.
Well, that's it, folks. That's straight talk, straight from the heartland. That's what it's all about. That's why I started this podcast, and I'm really glad to have her on the podcast. Professor Secchi, thanks again for coming on a podcast by George.
Oh, you're very welcome. It was fun.
Yeah, that's Sylvia Secchi. She's a associate professor in the Department of Geographical and Sustainability Services, Sciences, and senior research fellow, Public Policy Center for the University of Iowa. And folks, I hope you have enjoyed this frank discussion. I don't think you could call it anything but that. I hope you like Podcast by George. If you do, Please subscribe to us on YouTube. Ring the notification bell there. If you're not sure exactly what platform you want to follow us on, just go to podcastbygeorge.com, pick the little badge or icon where you'd like to get notification of each episode as it releases, and you'll never miss a single one. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.